So I was sitting here playing this game. Well, doing as close to playing it as I guess it is, because what you do is you just click on it. I'm not touching anything right now. He's just walking, right? You just choose a destination, he goes to it. I was just mining coal a second ago, so I guess that's interacting with the game a little bit. But I was just thinking about like some of my greatest fears, and this game makes me think about it because of the isolation. And the little guy, he's pretty upset by the isolation too. I mean, he makes like suicidal comments here and there. He made a comment about when we were walking through a puddle. He said this water wasn't deep enough to drown himself in. I mean, the name of the game is called The Longing because he's longing for someone else or just something to do. He's just waiting 400 days, basically playing the role of a sentient alarm clock for the king, right? And the king says when he wakes up in 400 days, he'll end all suffering and pain and longing or whatever. But I don't know what that means. It probably doesn't mean anything good. But this game just makes me think about like being forgotten, which is a fear that I've recently come to terms with. I realized that I don't think I want to be forgotten even after death. I want people to talk nicely about me. I want people to remember me in a good way. Um, that's probably my biggest fear. I mean, aside from infinity. And then I have a regular everyday fears like spiders, drowning, fucking burning to death, being eaten by a fucking bear or something like that. Um, but I think the biggest fear is infinity, and then right below that is being forgotten by people that are important to me. And I'm starting to wonder, that's probably why I bother making these videos. It's not like I have a huge audience. I have like a few of my friends who watch these videos because they find it entertaining to watch me like comment on things and fucking yell at my screen while I play games badly and watch me kill Sims basically. Like and that's cool, but it's like making these videos is like a record of my time here. It's similar to why I write. It's like I think I'm trying to connect with people, somebody, at least one person out there, and hopefully I do. Hopefully, like a friend told me that that video I made where I talked about living with schizoaffective disorder, like she said that was really important, and I hope that somebody who needed to hear that heard it. I hope that it helps somebody understand some stuff. I I hope that if somebody's out there suffering with schizoaffective disorder and they feel alone, I hope maybe they heard what I had to say and they felt less alone. That's how I feel about my writing. Everything I write, I'm like, well, I hope somebody reads this and feels less alone. Last time, like, I was playing this game, I was reading Blame alongside it, and Blame is probably one of the most anxiety inducing um, mangas I've read. And, like, because it reinforces that fear of being forgotten. I mean, it really is like it feels full and empty at once. It's like this gigantic, overpowering, overwhelming, massive galaxy-sized city, and like it's actually like galaxy-sized. Like that's what like the writer said, something along those lines, basically, right? And um, like humans, just they don't really. It doesn't matter if they exist in it or not. They're nothing in this world. They're basically insects. I mean, they are basically insects in this gigantic world. And I guess that's where the fear comes from, is being reduced to an insect, being reduced to nothing. And I had this dream about insects recently, and I did this whole research on insects and like um insects and dreams and what they mean. I actually came across a really interesting article, or it was like this whole paper that had been written about it. I'll find it because it was fucking wild and I should talk about it. Um, oh, it's the map room. I love this room. But that's what the world of Blame feels like. It feels like all the humans that are left, if they even qualify as humans at this point, because it really just the humans that are left are not really human in my opinion. And that's another thing that induces the fear, the uploading of the brains and being able to like have make copies of yourself and having a copy of yourself existing in the net while your body's dead. And it's just like it just whenever there are worlds like devoid of God or spirituality, that's always sets me on edge. And I used to be an atheist, but even back in the day, when I was a hardcore atheist, well, I wouldn't say hardcore, but I was an atheist, I would it would always set me on edge when I'd read stories where there just seems like the world is devoid of God. You know, I have no mouth and I must scream feels like a world devoid of God. Like that God just forgot about those 5 people, or God doesn't exist. Am tries to become God, but obviously he doesn't have the power to bring people back to life, but he did make them immortal at least. But he is not a God. The real God, the God that created the universe, seems to have forgotten these 5 people who were left behind, and I have no mouth and I must scream. And that's probably the most horrifying part. That's the part where I'm like, God either doesn't exist or he doesn't care about those 5 people, right? Oh, hey, books. One day these pages will crumble to dust. I hope to get a chance to read them first. Now I have 24 books at home. Is that what fell when I was sitting up there? Huh. Anyway, so what was I talking about? Blame and why it scares the living shit out of me. Um, the few humans that are left, the insects, if you will, they're being hunted down by like safeguards and exterminators. And whenever Killy comes across them, they're like basically on the verge of starving. Many of them are anyway. And speaking of Kelly, he's barely a person, and over the course of the manga, you learn he is a provisional safeguard. He's like a program. He's an AI. He has like no real free will if you think about it. He's just after the net terminal gene. He's programmed to only care about that. And I have a theory that in the beginning, the reason why he doesn't remember his duties is because he already had what he needed when he had that kid, so he didn't need to remember it anymore. That's why he didn't remember like how to read the numbers when he scans and stuff. But he gets that knowledge back after he runs into a safeguard later, Sanakin. And um, he's able to scan and see who's a safeguard human, who might have the net terminal gene, whatever, and he remembers how to read the information in front of his eyes after that. But before, he did it. In the beginning of the manga, he doesn't, and I think that's because in the beginning he has that kid with him. That's just like my speculation. I've read this manga like 3.5 times, and I still don't really understand it. Like, I don't know. It's hard to understand. But I'm not really here to talk about the plot. I'm more so here to talk about like why it induces these fears, because the city is like an infinite city. It is gigantic for all intents purposes. Like I said, we are insects in it. Humans that exist here are insects basically on the verge of dying out, right? Like the city forgot they exist. The world doesn't care about humans anymore. Um, any humans that are left barely qualify as human in my eyes. They upload and download their data, and then there's the silicone life, the synth humans, which again barely qualify as humans. These are just like android cyborg like robot things that are left. Everybody who is human isn't really human anymore. They're not by my standards. And that's scary as it is. So humans have been exterminated, in my opinion, for a long time. The fact that there was a gene that they used to hook up to the internet, hook up to the administration, just goes to show you that, like, they weren't human for a long fucking time. So the idea of an endless cycle also kind of freaks me out too, and that's what it seems like is happening with Kelly. Like, it seems like he is just on this endless cycle. Like I said, in the beginning of the manga, it seems like he already had what he needed with the kid, and then he lost it, and he starts the journey up again, looking for the net terminal gene, the net terminal gene, the net terminal, like down to his bones, that you must find the net terminal gene. That even when he forgot his other abilities, like being able to, like what happens when he scans people and stuff, and how to read that. Even when he forgot how to read that, he still knew he was looking for the net terminal gene. Even when he forgot who the administration was, even when he forgot all this other stuff, he still knew he was looking for the net terminal gene. And there are hints throughout this manga that tell you that many of the people he's ran into, such as Shibo and the other provisional safeguard, he's ran into before. He has dreams about them in human form, but you don't see him meeting them in human form. Uh, the other provisional safeguard, but he knows what they look like. So Come on, sit down and read. Why are you getting up? Read a book. That's what we're about to do. We're about to read a book too. Let's see. Find something nice and long. Okay. We're going to continue No Longer Human from where I left off in the Death Stranding video. Takaichi uttered that idiotic compliment that women would fall for me because I had been kind enough to clean the discharge from his ears. My reaction at the time was merely to blush and smile, without saying a word in return, but, to tell the truth, I already had a faint inkling of what his prophecy implied. No, to speak in those terms of atmosphere engendered by so vulgar an expression as to fall for, is to portray a precocity of sentiment not even worthy of the dialogue of the romantic lead in a musical comedy. I certainly was not moved by the farcical and self-satisfied emotions suggested by the phrase, to have a faint inkling. I have always found the female of the human species many times more difficult to understand than the male. In my immediate family, women outnumbered the men, and many of my cousins were girls. There were also the maid servant of the crime. There was also the maid servant of the crime. I think it would be no exaggeration to say that my only playmates while I was growing up were girls. Nevertheless, it was very much the sensation of treading on thin ice that I associated with these girls. I could almost never guess their motives. I was in the dark. At times I made indiscreet mistakes which brought me painful wounds. These wounds, unlike the scars from the lashing of a man might give, cut inwards very deep, like an internal hemorrhage, bringing intense discomfort. Once inflicted, it was extremely hard to recover from such wounds. Women only led me on only to throw me aside. They mocked and tortured me when others were around, only to embrace me with passion as soon as everyone had left. Women sleep so soundly they seem to be dead. Who knows? Women may live in order to sleep. These and various other generalizations were products of an observation of women since boyhood days, but my conclusion was that though women appear to belong to the same species as men, they are actually quite different creatures, and thus and these incomprehensible, insidious beings have, fantastic as it seems, always looked after me. In my case, such an expression as to be fallen for, or even to be loved, is not in the least appropriate. Perhaps it describes the situation more accurately to say that I was looked after. Women were also less demanding than men when it came to my clowning. When I played the jester, men did not go on laughing indefinitely. I knew that if I got carried away by my success in entertaining a man and overdid my role, my comedy would fall flat, and I was always careful to quit at a suitable place. Women, on the other hand, have no sense of moderation. No matter how long I went on with my antics, they would ask for more, and I would become exhausted, responding to their insatiable demands for encores, excuse me. They really laugh an amazing amount of the time. I suppose one can say that women stuff themselves with far more pleasures than men. We like funny men, you know? It's funny that even he didn't understand that back then. The two cousins in whose house I was living while attending school used to visit my room whenever they had the time. Their knock on my door, no matter how often it came, never failed to startle me so that I almost jumped in fright. "Are you studying?" "No," I would say with a smile, shutting my book. I would laugh into some silly story, miles removed from what I was thinking. Today at school, the geography teacher, the one we call the walrus, dot dot dot. One evening my cousins came to my room, and after they had compelled me to clown at unmerciful laughs, one of them proposed, "Yozo, let's see how you look with glasses on." "Why?" "Don't make such a fuss. Put them on. Here, take these glasses." They invariably spoke in the same harsh, peremptory tones. The clown meekly put on the older. Excuse me. Jesus. Sorry. I don't know who I'm apologizing to, but excuse me. Okay, where was I at? My cousins were convulsed with wait. The clown meekly put on the older girl's glasses. My cousins were convulsed with laughter. "You look exactly like him, exactly like Harold Lloyd." The American movie comedian was very popular at the time in Japan. I stood up. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, raising one arm in greeting, "I should like on this occasion to thank all my Japanese fans. I went through the motions of making a speech. They laughed all the harder. From then on, whenever a Harold Lloyd movie came to town, I went to see it and secretly studied his expressions. One autumn evening, as I was lying in bed reading a book, the older of my cousins, I always called her sister, suddenly darted into my room quick as a bird and collapsed over my bed. She whispered through her tears, "Yozo, you'll help me, I know. I know you will. Let's run away from this terrible house together. Oh, please, help me." She continued in this hysterical vein for a while, only to burst into tears again. This was not the first time that a woman had put on such a scene before me, and sister's excessively emotional words did not surprise me much. I felt instead a certain boredom at their banality and emptiness. I slipped out of bed, went to my desk, and picked up a persimmon. I peeled it and offered sister a section. She ate it, still sobbing, and said, "Have you any interesting books? Lend me something." I chose Soseki's "I Am a Cat" from my bookshelf and handed it to her. "Thanks for the persimmon," sister said as she left the room, an embarrassed smile on her face. Sister was not the only one. I have often felt that I would find it more complicated, troublesome, and unpleasant to ascertain the feelings by which a woman lives than to plumb the innermost thoughts of an earthworm. Long personal experience had taught me that when a woman suddenly bursts into hysterics, the way to restore her spirits is to give her something sweet. He's not wrong. He's not wrong. At least not when it comes to me. You give me something like that, that might make me feel better. Her younger sister, Set-chan, would even bring friends to my room, and in my usual fashion I amused them all with perfect impartiality. As soon as a friend had left, Set-chan would tell me disagreeable things about her, inevitably concluding, "She's a bad girl. You must be careful of her." If that's the case, I wanted to say, "You needn't have gone to the trouble of bringing her here." Thanks to Set-chan, almost all the visitors to my room were girls. This, however, by no means implies that what Takaichi's compliment, "women'll fall for you," had as yet been realized. I was merely the Harold Lloyd of Northeast Japan. Not for some years would Takaichi's silly statement come palpitatingly alive, metamorphosed into a sinister prophecy. Takaichi made one other important gift to me. One day he came to my room to play. He was waving a brightly colored picture which he proudly displayed. "It's a picture of a ghost," he explained. I was startled, that instant, as I could not help feeling in later years, determined my path of escape. I knew that Takaichi was showing me. I knew that it was only the familiar self-portrait of Van Gogh. When we were children, the French Impressionist school was very popular in Japan, and our first introduction to an appreciation of Western painting was often began with such works. The paintings of Van Gogh, Gauguin, Cézanne, and Renoir were familiar. I don't know how to pronounce these names, I'm sorry. Were familiar even to students at the country clubs, mainly through photographic reproductions. I myself have seen quite a few colored photographs of Van Gogh's paintings. His brushwork and the vividness of his colors had intrigued me, but I had never imagined his pictures to be of ghosts. I took from my bookshelf a volume of Modigliani reproductions and showed Takaichi the familiar nudes with skin the color of burnished copper. "How about these? You suppose they're ghosts too?" "They're terrific." Takaichi widened his eyes in admiration. "This one looks like a horse out of hell." "They really are ghosts then, aren't they?" "I wish I could paint pictures of ghosts like that," said Takaichi. "There are some people whose dread of human beings is so morbid that they reach a point where they yearn to see their own eyes monsters of ever more horrible shapes, and the more nervous they are, the quicker to take fright, the more violent they pray that every storm will be. Painters have had this mentality, after repeated wounds and intimidations at the hands of the apparitions called human beings, have often come to believe in phantasms. They plainly saw monsters in broad daylight, in the midst of nature, and they did not fob people off with clowning. They did their best to depict these monsters just as they had appeared. Takaichi was right. They had dared to paint pictures of devils. These, I thought, would be my friends in the future. I was so excited I could have wept. I'm going to paint, too. I'm going to paint pictures of ghosts and devils and horses out of hell. My voice, as I spoke these words to Takaichi, was lowered to a barely audible whisper. Why, I don't know. Ever since elementary school days, I enjoyed drawing and looking at pictures, but my pictures failed to win the reputation among my fellow students that my comic stories did. I never had the least trust in my opinions of human beings, and my stories represented to me nothing more than the clown's gesture of greeting to his audience. They enraptured all of my teachers, but for me they were devoid of the slightest interest. Only to my paintings, to the depiction of the object, my cartoons were something else again, did I devote any real efforts of my original though childish style. The copybooks for drawing we used at school were dreary. The teachers' pictures were incredibly inept, and I was obliged to experiment for myself entirely without direction, using every method of expression which came to me. I owned a set of oil paints and brushes from the time I entered high school. I sought to model my techniques on those of the Impressionist school, but my pictures remained flat as paper cutouts, and seemed to offer no promise of ever developing into anything. But Takaichi's words made me aware that my mental attitude towards painting had become completely mistaken. What superficiality and what stupidity there is in trying to depict in a pretty manner things that one has thought pretty, which one has thought pretty. The masters, through their subjective perceptions, create a beauty out of trivialities. They did not hide their interest even in things which were nauseatingly ugly, but soaked themselves in the pleasure of depicting them. In other words, they seem not to rely in the least on the misconceptions of others. Now that I have been initiated by Takaichi into these root secrets of the art of painting, I began to do a few self-portraits, taking care that they not be seen by the female visitors. The pictures I drew were so heartrending as to stupefy even myself. Here was the true self I had so desperately hidden. I had smiled cheerfully. I had made others laugh. This was the harrowing reality. I secretly affirmed this self, was sure there was no escape from it, but naturally I did not show my pictures to anyone except Takaichi. I disliked the thought that I must suddenly be subjected to their suspicious vigilance when once the nightmarish reality under the clowning was detected. On the other hand, I was equally afraid that they might not recognize my true self when they saw it, but imagine that it was just some new twist on my clowning, occasion for additional snickers. This would have been most painful of all. I therefore hid the pictures in the back of my cupboard.